quite particularly to the presentation of Jakob Thomä concerning macro trends in green finance. Mr. Thomä is Managing Director of the Thomä Investing Initiative. He has been a co-founder of this initiative, actually, launched in New York, Belgium. So the best known the tool is the PACTA tool of the 2-degree investing initiative, helping financial institutes to coordinate themselves with the Paris climate objectives, to have a look at it and have an analysis according to the management. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. This is particular joy. He has done a PhD in this theme, and he's an expert in this theme area for finance, and he's been involved in high-ranking financial institutes to accompany them on this path, and this function is still active, and so it's a particular pleasure to give you the floor. Jakob, to you. Thank you very much for your warm words of welcome and the opportunity to take the floor here concerning macro trends in front of you. Macro trends as a topic for presentation is quite a challenge because it's quite inviting you to do the big throw and to talk about a vision for the coming 30 years. And I'm trying to avoid becoming too abstract and rather be specific in the choice of topics I'd like to mention. I have the privilege to give the presentation here in Luxembourg today. Luxembourg, as indicated initially, is known as a financial center in Europe, not quite as well known. Luxembourg, a hub for satellites as well. I don't know whether you know this, and the second biggest satellite distributor worldwide is here in Luxembourg. That's what I found out in my short internet research yesterday. And so maybe a first overview concerning Luxembourg, one of my favorite movies as an introduction, Star Wars. And maybe this is a good link to green finance. Well, episode 4, you remember? First movie is a dark menace, and like in finance, it's starting in finance as well, there's a dark threat, a menace. It's a carbon truck initiative and other initiatives, and I would even dare mentioning mine at the same time, all these initiatives showing up. And that's how green finance has been mainstreamed initially. Climate risks, leading to the interest that sustainable finance not only for tree huggers, as we call them, but also for those interested in euros and cents at the end of it all. As we've been mentioned of the center stage taken up by these topics now, right now in the central banks, NGSF and others, stress tests, climate stress test scenario, as far as you can see. And this is remaining a major trend, of course, but there's another insight as well in this context, being the fact that talking about financial stability and financial supervision, climate risks are still very badly understood. The IPCC report has been mentioned here. There's a chapter concerning economic risks as well linked to climate change. If you have a look at it, you will see quite quickly that there's still a major delta here between the story of the environmental disasters in the world and the economic consequences on the other hand. So a whole series of studies are indicating that climate change in Europe might possibly even have a positive economic consequence. I'm not supporting these reports, but you can find them in the IPCC report, and we want to follow science, and the climate risk analysis in financial markets is being even more difficult due to that, because the newest study in Germany, 300 billion have been mentioned until 2050. So this was just a very tiny little drop in the ocean of the financial market. But you can see how the trends in the financial market could make sure how green finance can improve the knowledge about these aspects. Two aspects have been mentioned already, one being the link between nature and climate. This is something that's rather new, these two aspects being brought together. And social climate risks as well. Mrs. Minister talked about the 3 major risks. Please allow me, without being rude, to add a 4th one, being the social risks linked to these 3 aspects you mentioned beforehand. And actually, first models are showing that if you have social and nature risks brought together with climate risks, this is 2-3x the effects more than the pure climate change. So green finance was, as a matter of fact, during the last 8 years, climate green finance, specifically 95-98% of the oxygen to be taken up here in the climate change are led over there. And this is changing. And in the first chapter, in episode 4, the dark thread, this is good image for this interest aspect. Episode 2, the dark thread, is the first move. What did I say? Episode 4 says the speaker. Losing my orientation as well. No, this is the order. But chronologically, episode 1, dark thread. Episode 2, the Epic Warriors. And please, I will not mention all Star Wars more in the coming 20 minutes. No worries. I will mention only the first 6. So the attack of the Clone Warriors. So this is a repetition or replication of different good ideas. More and more indicators, more ratings. 2015, mentioned in the introduction, I was involved also. The first climate compatibility method that was developed. Since then, all data providers have their own methods, not as much as we have sand on the beaches, but they are quite numerous. But this is positive. We can see that there's an uptake. We can see that things are being replicated. Things are being reinterpreted as well. That's quite exciting as well to have these bright temperature rise metrics, climate alignment tests, portfolio 2.3 degrees or 3.5 degrees, and so on and so forth. These are in the forefront, and we can see this in other areas. It's ESG ratings, CO2 footprint indicators, and so on and so forth. Comparability remains a problem here. Nevertheless, there's a lot of counter movements, but it's very difficult to have comparability. And GSF scenario, as an example, being the basis supposedly for climate stress tests. Actually, there's not only one GSF scenario, the objective being the harmonization on the one hand, but if you have a look at the scenario running through the stress test, there's some of these scenarios where there's completely different science. GCAM scenario, for instance, has plus 30% for the company so-and-so, and another one, reminds you, has minus 30%. So it's enormously difficult still to have the attack of the Clone Warriors as an image again, to have comparability. And this tension is remaining in real finance as well. And I mention this as being tension because it's not clear how targeted these cloning or replication or comparability is. Is it important to be able to compare everything with everything and to have a common measuring basis, or in the sense of diversity of perspectives in the financial sector, it would be a good thing to have different financial institutions encountering sustainability in different ways. So problem here is the one question linked to the question whether they are clone warriors, and that would be a problem, or for the Star Wars aficionados. And I remain the motto is that the warriors have less firepower. They never reach the ones they wanted to reach. Climate temperature rise, metrics, MSCI, and hot water, because Tesla at the climate indicator had, as a result, 3 degrees increase. They have a lot of climate problems, but with the climate compatibility, how would they reach 3.6 degrees? The company has Tesla or Morningstar Apple saying that 2050 Apple will have the same climate footprint as they have today. Not quite realistic, actually. We've seen the curves. Even a business as usual would lead to a little bit less emissions for Apple. They have an objective of 75%. So the firepower problem is remaining. Episode 3, the revenge of the SIP. Here in Europe, we have a little bit less of this, but we know now the anti-ESG movement in America, Florida being a prominent example here, and Oklahoma as well. Certain financial institutions are no longer in a position to be available as clients, cannot continue to work together with these federal states. Certain studies are showing that linked to that credit costs for these ferrous have been on the increase because liquidities have been less. Oklahoma is one example here. But here in Europe, we have also the revenge of the SEP being the greenwashing. And this is strengthened as a problem here. Greenwashing has been not so much of a problem 10 years ago when I started because there was nothing was being washed. There was not much greenwashing. Now, greenwashing is mentioned by all of them. You see posters in airports, stations, supermarkets maybe even, and in the financial sector also. In Germany particularly, this has become prominent with the DWS scandal, more particularly where the police showed up even. Another interesting example is the DK Bank in Germany, where there has been completed by consumer protection that an impact is suggested with a CO2 calculator, putting on the same real consumer footprint with the investment footprint. So in all these topics, it's quite exciting to see how green finance has been able to bring up new accents for real transformation. And why do they do this? We're talking about the CO2 footprint. CO2 footprint calculators are everywhere. Uber has a very nice one used in Germany especially, but in other countries some similar calculators are available, but the CO2 footprint calculators don't have a calculation of the impact, only footprint. If I ride my bicycle and not my Ferrari or my chopper to go to work, which I do preferably, I will reduce my emissions. But if I buy vegan and not real meat in the supermarket, I don't. This has only indirect effects, and these indirect effects are enormously complicated for the financial sector because they're even more indirect than the direct consumer decision. But let's not underestimate these effects in a real economy as well, these indirect effects nevertheless. And philosophical questions are brought up as well. What is CO2 footprint? What do I want to measure actually? But in one way and the other, it is clear that in our green financing path, we can only be successful if this SWIFT and this challenge is really taken up. Episode 4, New Hope. New hope being necessarily technology. And this is, especially in the last 2 years, and it has become clearer and clearer. We are still remaining in the paradigm of traditional systems, corporate disclosure, legal processes, disclosure, due to legal aspects in the working for years and have to be refurbished immediately after. And this has been changing in a major way since then. We have projects in SME, scan of thousands of GDP, satellite data, leading us back to the Luxembourg core industry again, satellites, but voting and engagement areas as well. Challenges here again, it's not the values we are looking for still. It's very conservative, this market, concerning traditional systems, and very carefully here with new data. Investors, Walmart parkings scanned with satellites to have sales figures broken thanks to that, but these are still niche markets for this kind of activity. And then the empire strikes back, new regulation. I was wondering what I might say about this. I'm here with an expert audience, and so I don't have to talk about all the details. Could last for a whole day. We have taxonomy, of course, but quite interesting is greenwashing as an aspect. In the political field, in the first HLEC process, I was involved as well at the time, and greenwashing at the time was not a major topic yet. It was of market building, and this has been changing a lot since then. And you can see this in initiatives like ESMA or labels or others. And the role of NGOs, quite rightly so, they have a critical view on this, not only constructive and positive in their involvement. So the return of the Jedi Wars. Who are the Jedi Wars in my... I don't have the immediate answer for you, but in the course of today and tomorrow you can have a look at it. Quite exciting. The international coordination initiatives, GFAN, for instance, being mentioned by everyone. Interesting that this ambitious objective was to have a reduction until 2050, and IPCC only for the end of the century, direction of all greenhouse gases, but impact management systems and real emission reductions. And for green finance, this is still not reaching the objective. You have portfolio thinking. My word is my portfolio. But what happens if I divest here? What happens if I have a restructuring of my portfolio in order to have real emissions reductions? And this is the sixth main trend. It's not only enough to be green, but now you have to reach a point where you recoloring green as well. Luckily, you know, Solo, the Star Wars story, let's not even mention this here, but Solo, well, is still a danger for the green finance sector nowadays, going for it alone. First institutional leaving the G funds. We have a bigger splitting up in taxonomy as well. So for the first 6 movies, we leave it as in, and Solo, the Star Wars story, will certainly not, hopefully at least, be the next big trend in green finance. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.